Now, some of you youngins out there may, every once in a while, see somebody like me, and you may think, who was Elvis Presley? Well, today, I'm going to answer that for you. Take these off, though, so I can read a little bit easier. He was called the King. That's because Elvis Presley ruled rock and roll. There were other singers in the 1950s, but nobody like Elvis. Nobody like Elvis. He looked different. He greased his hair and grew long sideburns. He wore whatever he wanted. I mean, even pink pants with black stripes looked cool on Elvis. And boy, could he dance. Then there was the music. In the 50s, before Elvis, there was no rock and roll. There were two kinds of popular music. On the radio, white singers sang romantic songs or cute songs. A big hit in 1953 was How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? And in small clubs, black singers were performing rhythm and blues or R&B. It was loud with a strong beat and was easy to dance to. Back then, R&B wasn't played very much on radio stations just because it was black music. But Elvis listened to those black singers, mainly from records other kids had, and he loved that music. Rhythm and blues, they helped to make Elvis a big star. He sang R&B in his own special way. Girls screamed when he stood on stage and wiggled his hips. Boys tried to look like him. Parents were upset. They didn't like this new music. They thought Elvis was just too wild. But there was no turning back. This was the start of rock and roll. And of all the rock stars to come, Elvis was always the biggest. He had one hit record after another, and he sold out concerts. He became a movie star. And when he died more than 30 years ago, Elvis left behind millions of fans who still miss him. Tours of his home, Graceland, are packed. There's more color in person. This is just a book. Thousands of people show up in Memphis, Tennessee to celebrate his birthday. They also there to cry on the anniversary of the day he died, August 16th, 1977. Elvis Presley is gone, but the King lives on. Let me tell you about Tupelo. Elvis wasn't always rich. He didn't always own a mansion or a garage filled with Cadillacs. He didn't always have fancy clothes or expensive jewelry. As a boy, Elvis was poor. Very poor. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8th, 1935 in Tupelo, Mississippi. His mother Gladys was pregnant with twins, but she didn't know it. Like a lot of poor people in the South, the Presleys didn't have the money to see doctors, so Elvis's mother gave birth at home. The delivery was difficult. At around 4 in the morning, Gladys gave birth to a son, but sadly, he was stillborn. Then Gladys realized there was another baby inside of her, and about a half hour later, Elvis arrived. The family named the baby who died Jesse Garin. The healthy boy was named Elvis Aaron. Gladys and Vernon Presley couldn't even afford a gravestone for little Jesse Garin. Though he never met Jesse Garin, Elvis thought about his twin all the time. He wondered what life would have been like with a brother. As a boy, he would go visit Jesse's grave. As a famous rock star, Elvis still talked about the brother he never knew. Elvis's childhood wasn't easy. His family struggled. The Presleys lived on the poor side of town. Their house had only 2 rooms. Vernon hadn't finished high school. He married Gladys when he was just 17. Without an education, Vernon found it hard to find or keep a good job. At different times, he worked on farms, painted houses, drove trucks. A lot of people were going through hard times, just like the Presleys. Elvis was born in the middle of the Great Depression. All across the United States, people couldn't find work. They couldn't make enough money for food and clothes. People had to beg for food or hope for free lunch at the soup kitchen. Families moved from town to town looking for work. Some people had to live in cardboard boxes. At least the Presleys had a home. It didn't have electricity or running water. There was no indoor bathroom. But instead, Vernon built an outhouse in the backyard, and outhouse is small and wooden. It doesn't really have a real toilet, just a hole in the ground. Gladys couldn't have any more babies, so she became very nervous that Elvis might get hurt. She walked him to school every single day. She gave him a whipping when he did something wrong. Elvis didn't like getting hit, but he loved his mother very much. He would hurry home after school in the afternoon to be with his mama. The Presley family went through ups and downs. When Vernon got a good job, the family would usually buy a new house. When he lost a job, they would have to sell it and move into a smaller rented place. One time, Vernon was so desperate he tried to cheat someone out of that money. That got him in big trouble. A judge sent Vernon to jail for 8 months. Gladys and Elvis were forced to move in with Vernon's family. Most weekends, they rode a bus to see Vernon in prison. It was 10 hours round trip. Elvis, who was just 3, sometimes sat on the front steps of his house crying. He didn't think his father would ever come home. But Vernon did return, and he found a new job. The family joined a local church. It was at church that Elvis first started singing. He was so good that he sang with the choir. Right away, people could tell that his voice was special. He even won a prize at a fair for singing. Gladys always encouraged Elvis. The family couldn't afford much. However, for Elvis's 11th birthday, Gladys gave him his first guitar. "It will help you with your singing," she said, "and everyone does enjoy hearing you sing." This little thing about the Grand Ole Opry here. I'll read it. Back before iPods or CDs, people listened to music at home on record players or on the radio. Radio shows were popular the way TV shows are now. In 1925, a Nashville radio station began hosting concerts featuring the biggest country music stars. The show was first named the WSM Barn Dance. 2 years later, it became known as the Grand Ole Opry. Every week, crowds filled the hallways of the station to hear Hank Williams, Minnie Pearl, and others. The show was so popular it moved into an auditorium and then into an even bigger one. Today, country music fans can hear the shows on the radio or watch them on television. Elvis loves listening to the Opry as a kid. He performed on the show only once, on October 2nd, 1954. Chapter 2, Memphis. Now that Elvis had a guitar, he wanted to play it. Gladys asked a local pastor named Frank Smith to help teach her son the guitar. Elvis was his own teacher, too. By reading a book, he figured out where to put his fingers. Elvis began hanging out at WELO, a local radio station. There he heard older and better guitar players. He listened carefully to how they played, and every Saturday night, Elvis, Gladys, and Vernon would gather around their radio. They listened to the songs country music stars from the Grand Ole Opry. "I took the guitar and I watched people, and I learned how to play a little bit," Elvis said later. "But I would never sing in public. I was very shy about it, you know." In 7th grade, Elvis started to bring his guitar to school every day, except when it was raining. Some kids made fun of him. They called his songs hillbilly music. Hillbilly was a nasty name for someone who lived in the backwoods. Some kids were even meaner. One cut the strings of Elvis's guitar when he wasn't looking. In November of 1948, when Elvis was in the middle of the 8th grade, Vernon and Gladys decided to move again, but this time they weren't heading back to another shack in Tupelo. No, the Presleys were headed to the big city, Memphis, Tennessee. It was a little more than 100 miles away. They packed a family car, a 1939 Plymouth, and left. They were looking for a fresh start, and they got it. Before long, Vernon had a job loading and unloading heavy cases of paint. Gladys worked in a factory that made curtains. Elvis needed a new guitar teacher. He found one in Jesse Lee, the 18-year-old son of the local preacher. Every Saturday and Sunday, Jesse Lee came over to the Presley home. He and Elvis practiced downstairs in the laundry room. In Memphis, Elvis began to grow up. The shy kid made friends: Buzzy, Farley, and Paul. The 4 boys rode bikes together, went to the movies, and played football. They made money mowing lawns. By junior year in high school, Elvis looked different. He grew sideburns, which made him look older. He also started meeting girls. They liked the fact that he was a little shy. Elvis took a girl named Regis to the school prom. Then there was music. Memphis was so much bigger than Tupelo. Elvis went to Charlie's, a store where kids were allowed to hang out and listen to records. In those days, there were no iPods or CDs. Elvis and his buddies put on 78s, records made of thick shellac. Only one song fit on each side. Elvis visited the local radio station, WMPS, which would host concerts. He also went to Ellis Auditorium. Once a month, people gathered there to sing gospel songs and music Elvis knew from church. Sometimes they sang all through the night. At parties, the once bashful Elvis started to loosen up, but he was still shy. His Aunt Lillian described how her nephew once sang. At a birthday party. "I moved everything out of the living room, and Elvis came in and brought his guitar," remembered Lillian, "but he had to put the lights out before he'd sing." Shy or not, singing was Elvis's greatest love, and he was living in Memphis at just the right time. Memphis was home to Sun Studios, a company started by a man named Sam Phillips. Mr. Phillips, as Elvis called him, wanted to record a new kind of music. It didn't have a name. It used the electric guitar. And the singing, the vocals, were loud. The music was faster than what was played on the radio and more fun to dance to. Nobody knew what to call it, but years later it became known as rock and roll. At first, by the way, that was coined in Cleveland, Ohio. Just saying. At first, many of the musicians recording for Mr. Phillips were black, singers named Howlin' Wolf and Rufus Thomas. Then, in August of 1953, 18-year-old Elvis walked into Sun Studios. Shyly, he put $3.98 on the table. He wanted to record a song for his mother, and so Elvis Presley stepped into the recording studio for the first time. Sun Studios. Elvis went to Sun Studios with his beat-up guitar. Then the song he chose to sing, My Happiness, had been popular a few years earlier. It was a soft ballad that his mother loved. A nice woman named Marion Keister ran Sun Records with Mr. Phillips. From behind her desk, she asked Elvis what kind of music he sang. "I sing all kinds," he told her. "What do you sound like?" she asked. "I don't sound like nobody," Elvis told her. Elvis recorded My Happiness. Mrs. Keister printed his name out and pasted it onto the record. Elvis left, but he came back. In fact, Elvis kept on visiting Sun. Mr. Phillips was always too busy to talk with him. Mrs. Keister, though, loved to chat with a handsome boy who had the voice of an angel. Elvis had graduated high school by this time. Like a lot of people he knew, he didn't plan on going to college. Instead, he got a job at a machine shop, and he sang. Elvis kept going to all-night gospel sing-alongs. He listened to the radio so he could learn how to play more songs. One night, Elvis heard about a band looking for a singer. This could be his big break. He got a special haircut and wore a pink shirt for the tryout. Elvis sang only 2 songs. A friend of his watched. Afterward, he told Elvis, "You're never going to make it as a singer." If only he knew. One day in the summer of 1954, Mrs. Keister called Elvis. Mr. Phillips had a song that might be right for Elvis. Could Elvis get down to the studio that afternoon? Of course he could. But it turned out Mr. Phillips didn't like how Elvis sang the song. He asked Elvis if he knew any others. Well, sure he did. Elvis sang every song he knew. Then he sang parts of songs he knew. Mr. Phillips stopped recording and just sat in the recording booth just listening. He knew this kid didn't have experience. He knew Elvis needed training. But Mr. Phillips also knew that Elvis had something very special. Mr. Phillips told a local guitar player about Elvis. His name was Scotty Moore. And he wanted to hear Elvis. But when he called, Elvis wasn't home. That didn't stop Gladys. She rushed to the movie theater where Elvis was to tell him the news. A few days later, Elvis went over to Scotty's house. Scotty thought the boy looked a little crazy. Elvis was wearing pink pants, white shoes, and a black shirt, and his hair was greased up in a style called a ducktail. Scotty introduced Elvis to his friend Bill, who played bass guitar. A regular guitar has 6 strings, a bass has only 4 and makes a deeper sound. Again, Elvis played every song he knew. Most of the songs were slow ballads. Neither Scotty nor Bill were impressed, but they agreed to go into the studio with Elvis the next night. At Sun Studios with the other 2 musicians, Elvis sang "I Love You Because" every which way. Sometimes he let his voice go high, sometimes low, sometimes he whistled during it, sometimes he didn't. Unfortunately, Mr. Phillips wasn't happy with any of these recordings. He told everybody to just take a break. The 2 guitar players got sodas. Elvis kept fiddling with his guitar. All of a sudden, he started playing an old blues song. It was called "That's All Right, Mama, That's All Right for You. That's all right, Mama, just any way you do." As he sang, Elvis started dancing and jumping around the room. The guitarists heard Elvis and liked what he was doing. They put down their sodas and started to play along. At last, Mr. Phillips was hearing something he liked. When everybody in the studio listened to the recording, they were amazed. It was loud and electric and different. Mr. Phillips called the local radio station and asked the disc jockey, "Put on the record." When "That's All Right, Mama" played the next night, Gladys and Vernon were standing close to the radio so they could really listen to their son. Others must have listened too, because more than 100 people called the radio station, "Play that song again." It wasn't long before Elvis, Scotty, and the bass player began appearing at local concerts. People loved to hear Elvis sing, but they loved to watch him too. He was so handsome, and when he shook his hips, girls went wild. At the end of one show, Elvis joked with the fans, saying, "Girls, I'll see you backstage." That was all they needed to hear. Screaming girls pushed through an open window into his dressing room. They tore off his shirt and boots and tried to yank off his pants. Elvis held on tight. Only a few months before, Elvis was driving a truck to make money. That night, he started to feel like a star. Chapter 4. Colonel Tom Parker. Girls weren't the only ones interested in watching Elvis. A man named Colonel Tom Parker was taking notes. Colonel Parker wasn't actually a colonel. He had once been in the Army, but he was not an officer, and he dropped out to join the circus. Parker thought colonel made him sound more important. Parker couldn't sing or play an instrument. He was a businessman who managed country singer Hank Snow. Colonel Parker had big plans for Elvis. When they met, he told the young singer that playing small concerts near his home wasn't good enough. He should be touring the country. Elvis should appear on television shows and star in movies. With his looks and style, why, Elvis could be bigger than anyone before him. There was one problem. Elvis already had a manager. His name was Bob Neal. Bob was friendly and hardworking. He got Elvis a regular spot on Louisiana Hayride, a popular concert series on the radio. He also helped Elvis make business deals with Mr. Phillips at Sun Studios. That didn't stop Parker. He was pushy. Parker knew Elvis needed him. Sun was too small. Bob Neal was too small. And Elvis was going to be big. Famous record companies should be recording his music. That was a way to get big hits all across the country. Mr. Phillips knew all this too, but he didn't like Parker, and he didn't want to let Elvis go. Vernon wanted Elvis to sign with Parker. The talk of big movies and big record deals impressed Elvis's father, but Gladys had her doubts. She hardly knew this Colonel Parker, and he wasn't easy to like. Parker smoked big cigars that stank up their home. He was older than Vernon. He was blunt, saying whatever he wanted, even if it made people feel bad. He only seemed to care about money. Gladys worried about girls running after her son, tearing at his clothes. Would he be happy spending most nights on a bus, traveling from concert to concert? Gladys wanted him to settle down and start a family. Elvis adored his mama. Still, he ended up doing what his father wanted. In August of 1955, Colonel Parker became special advisor to Elvis. And sure enough, a few months later, Parker got RCA Records to buy Elvis's contract with Sun. RCA paid $35,000. That was more money than any other record company had ever paid for a singer. Some people at RCA worried that Elvis would be a flop. Maybe they'd made a big mistake. They had nothing to worry about. Elvis's first song for RCA was about a man whose girlfriend had broken up with him. The song was slow and depressing. Elvis sang it his way. His voice was low and quiet in parts, at other times he shouted. The sound was raw, full of feeling. Unlike other songs, it wasn't fast or easy to dance to. People liked it anyways. Heartbreak Hotel soon came to be the most popular song in the country. Well, since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. Just down at the end of Lonely Street at Heartbreak Hotel. Maybe you know it. That's how 1956 started with Elvis. He was just 21, but he was about to change music forever. Fame was going to change his life too. After Heartbreak Hotel, Elvis had money. Lots of money. He bought Gladys a pink Cadillac and a new house for the Presleys with a swimming pool. Why did Elvis get popular so fast? Television helped. Back in those days, there were only a few channels and a few popular shows. When Elvis appeared on TV, people couldn't believe what they were singing. Popular singers didn't wear tight jeans and tight shirts. Nobody had a greasy ducktail. Elvis got swept up in the music as he sang. His knees would shake, he'd curl his lip in a sneer, then he'd smile a little and shut his eyes. He'd also move his hips back and forth. Grown-ups thought this was dirty dancing. People started to call him Elvis the Pelvis. They didn't want their kids to watch Elvis or dress like him. Mr. Presley has no discernible singing ability, the New York Times wrote. Another newspaper had a headline that read, "Beware Elvis Presley." What people said hurt Elvis. He wasn't wild. He still lived with his mom and dad. He just wanted to sing. And he wanted to make people happy. "I don't do any vulgar movements," Elvis said to reporters. "It's just my way of expressing how I feel." Steve Allen, a famous TV host, had Elvis wear a tuxedo on his show. He told Elvis not to shake his hips. Instead, Allen had Elvis sing his song Hound Dog to a basset hound also wearing a tuxedo. Ed Sullivan's Show was a popular Sunday night show. When Elvis came on, the cameras showed him only from the waist up. If he wiggled his hips or shook his legs, the viewers wouldn't see it. In the end, it didn't matter what grown-ups thought of Elvis. The time was ripe for Elvis Presley. This was the late 1950s. Some people were starting to rebel against their parents. Rock and roll was their music. Frank Sinatra was their parents' singer. Elvis was theirs. After Heartbreak Hotel, the hits kept coming. Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel went straight to number one. Elvis Presley didn't create rock and roll. Bill Haley had a hit with Rock Around the Clock. Chuck Berry, famous for his duck walk across the stage, sang Johnny Be Good. And Jerry Lee Lewis, who sometimes kicked away his piano bench when he played, was another rock and roll star. But Elvis, with his looks and voice, was much bigger than anybody else. For Colonel Parker, Elvis still wasn't big enough. He wanted Elvis to be king, and to do that, Elvis needed to be in movies. Chapter 6, Movie Star. Once again, Elvis's timing was right. The young actor, James Dean, by the way, I'm from Fairmont, Indiana. James Dean is my homeboy. The young actor James Dean had died in a car accident in 1955. Elvis was a great fan of Dean's. He had seen Rebel Without a Cause more than 40 times. James Dean and Elvis Presley were both young, handsome, and sexy. Movie producers were desperate to find the next James Dean. They thought Elvis might do the trick. Elvis signed a deal with a big Hollywood movie studio. In 1956, he arrived on the set of Love Me Tender. It took place during the Civil War. Elvis played a singing farm boy. Movie critics didn't like Love Me Tender. Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go. Elvis didn't know the first thing about acting. How could he? He'd never done it before. They also thought it was silly for his character to sing in the middle of scenes, or in the middle of reading a book. Colonel Parker didn't care about his critics, neither did fans. Love Me Tender was a big hit. Elvis's fans filled up theaters, many fans seeing the movie again and again. The movie people were excited. Here was their new James Dean. They were willing to pay a lot of money to keep Elvis Presley. Before long, Elvis was making one movie after another. He made 31 in between 1956 and 1969. Making movies kept Elvis so busy he barely had time to record music. He certainly didn't have time for concerts. Colonel Parker didn't mind. Why did Elvis need a tour? His records sold even if he didn't appear before an audience. 1957, Elvis bought a mansion in Memphis. He called it, that's right, you guessed it, Graceland. He planned for the whole family to move there, but in less than a year, something happened. Well, Elvis was drafted. Today, people decide whether to join the armed forces, but before 1973, just women or men had no choice. They had to serve. Women were not drafted. Not even Elvis Presley could avoid the draft, and even Elvis had to get an Army crew cut. Before and after photos of Elvis made newspaper headlines all across the country. Elvis was no longer a rock star. He was Private Elvis Presley. Then something terrible happened. Gladys became very sick. She couldn't eat anything and had to go into the hospital. Elvis kept her pink Cadillac parked right outside her window so she could see it from the bed. Elvis was allowed to come home and visit her. For a while, Gladys seemed better. Then, in the middle of the night, the doctors called Elvis. He rushed off to the hospital, but his mother had died before he got there. It was the biggest loss of his life. Gladys hadn't just been his mother. She was his best friend, the closest person to him in the entire world. The next morning, Elvis sat on the front step of his beautiful new house and cried. But because he was Elvis, there was no privacy. Photographers snapped pictures of him weeping into his hands. Chapter 7, Priscilla. Private Presley was sent to an army base in Friedberg, Germany, on October 1st, 1958. Elvis thought he would never be happy again. His mother was gone. He was thousands of miles from home. Meanwhile, Colonel Parker had other worries. What would being in the Army do to Elvis's career? The United States was not at war, so Elvis never fought in any battles. Army bases near enemy countries such as USSR were there in case of war. In Germany, Elvis drove a Jeep for a sergeant. He and a friend were also in charge of the talent show. Elvis played piano. Friedberg, Germany. Still, Elvis. Yeah. Elvis wasn't treated. It was a little tricky to turn the page here. Like any other soldier who had to sleep on a bunk bed in the barracks, Elvis rented rooms at a local hotel. I didn't even know that. His grandma and father, they flew over for a visit. Elvis invited two friends from Memphis, too. During the day, Elvis had to work, but at night, he and his buddies, they loved to goof around. They ran through a hotel room shooting squirt guns. One time, a prank went too far. They set a small fire by mistake, and the hotel manager kicked them out. After that, Elvis rented a house. Elvis started to get on less and less sleep. The only time for fun was at night, but he needed to be awake during the day. Another soldier gave Elvis pills just to keep him awake. The pills worked, so he began to take more. In those days, nobody really understood the danger of pills. Once people started taking them, they couldn't stop. After his father and mother his father and friends returned to Memphis, Elvis was lonelier than ever. But then Elvis met Priscilla I never knew how to say her name, Balu? I don't know. She was an American girl who was 14 and a half years old. Elvis was 24. Priscilla's stepfather was a captain in the Air Force. He said she was too young to go on a date, but Elvis went to Priscilla's stepfather. He promised to remain just friends with Priscilla. He would wait until she was older before starting a romance. For the first time, he thought he was in love. Really, Elvis? 14. In March of 1960, the Army sent Elvis home. He had served for more than a year. At the airport, Priscilla said goodbye for now. She worried they'd never see each other again, but Elvis loved her. He told her in all the letters. Now that Elvis was back in the United States, Colonel Parker focused on his career again. Elvis was going to be bigger than ever. The famous singer Frank Sinatra hosted a television program to welcome Elvis home. That was on March 26, 1960. Elvis sang 2 songs. Girls in the audience screamed throughout his performance. The king was back. That's very cool footage, by the way. Elvis started making the same silly movies again, starting with G.I. Blues. Though he longed to make a great film, he started a singing lifeguard in Fun in Acapulco, a singing race car driver in Spin Out, and a singing doctor who falls in love with a nun in Change of Habit. Still, people kept buying tickets for Elvis Presley movies. The songs in the movies were good. There was Wise Men Say Only Fools Rush In, but I can't help falling in love with you. In a 1961 movie called Blue Hawaii, it remains a classic love ballad. Next year, he had another hit with Return to Sender, Address Unknown, from the movie Girls, Girls, Girls. In real life, the only girl in his life was Priscilla. She and Elvis were reunited when she left Germany and came back to the United States. The couple was married on May 1st, 1967 at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. Fun fact, that was the very first place I ever sang, was the Aladdin Hotel. I'm not saying, but in Vegas, the very first place I ever sang as Elvis was the Aladdin. Anyways, less than a year later, on February 1st, 1968, their daughter Lisa Marie was born. But the happy times didn't last. Colonel Parker was working Elvis too hard. With an overloaded schedule, Elvis never had time for acting lessons. Sometimes he didn't start learning his lines until he was in the car driving to the movie set. His movie schedule also prevented him from recording new music. There wasn't time to spend recording in a studio, and young people's tastes were changing. It was the 1960s. People were listening to Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Rolling Stones. Folk singers were protesting the Vietnam War and racism. Then there was Elvis. He sang Old MacDonald Had a Farm in a terrible movie called Double Trouble. Wow. That's, Well, why don't you say how you really feel there, Geoff Edgers? He seemed to belong to the past. Elvis's biggest fear was coming true. He was only 32 and no longer popular. Not the way he had been before. People didn't take him seriously. Elvis felt trapped and jealous. When the Beatles came to his house to meet him, at first, Elvis barely looked up at the younger musicians. He pretended to keep watching TV. In the end, they did jam together on a couple songs. Elvis grew more and more depressed. All the work made it hard for him to get such rest. I like the way you did that. Nice. Once again, Elvis got in the habit of taking pills to stay awake. And then when he needed rest, he took other pills to go to sleep. Elvis started staying up all night and then sleeping through the days. All the drugs made him puffy, and he started to gain weight. Worst of all, he and Priscilla, the wife he loved so much, started to argue a lot. He needed something to inspire him. He needed a goal. He needed to make a comeback. So it was 1968. You can tell by the hair. Elvis knew his career needed changes. He had to break away from Colonel Parker. That wouldn't be easy. His father still believed in Parker. Vernon always wondered why Elvis was so upset. Elvis had it all, a mansion, private planes, beautiful wife, and a baby girl. Elvis was unhappy. He wanted to play concerts again. He wanted to hear screaming fans. He missed making good music. Forget the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. He was the king. It was time to remind everyone of that. The big comeback began on television. In 1968, NBC signed up Elvis to do a TV special. NBC hired a good director and writers to put together the program. Colonel Tom Parker was barely involved. The show was going to remind everybody why they loved Elvis. He was going to be up on stage again, flashing that famous smile. He was going to sing with the same boldness as in his early days on TV. It would be classic Elvis. No songs like Old MacDonald. Elvis was ready. He exercised to get in shape. He grew long sideburns again. He had a tight black leather suit made for the show, which is by far the coolest one he ever wore, by the way. And his old friend Scotty Moore from the Sun Recordings days, he was going to play with him. There was a studio audience, so it would feel like a real concert. Then, right before the start of the show, Elvis got nervous. Really nervous. It had been so long since he performed in front of anybody. Still, Elvis took the stage. He sang new songs and old songs. He played Hound Dog. That's all right, Mama. He was happy and handsome and smooth and electric. He was great that night. The Elvis special was the most popular show of the season. But the comeback wasn't complete. Elvis needed to make new music. He wanted to compete with the Beatles. In January of 1969, Elvis went to a new producer. His name was Chips Moman. Chips wasn't like other people around Elvis. Chips didn't worry about upsetting the king. He said what he felt. When a recording wasn't good enough, he had a simple way of dealing with it. Chips would say, "Try it again, Elvis." Silly Chips. And Elvis never argued. He wanted to make great music. Elvis never wrote his own songs. He had to choose what to sing. With Chips, he stayed away from light songs like the ones in his movies. Chips suggested a song called "In the Ghetto." As the snow flies on a cold and gray Chicago morning, a poor little baby child is born in the ghetto. It was about African American children living in the poor neighborhoods. Maybe one of Elvis's friends told him not to make message songs. This wasn't Elvis's image. But Elvis trusted Chips, and "In the Ghetto" became a big hit. Another song was about a man and woman breaking up. One of my favorites. We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. In Suspicious Minds, there were horns and women singing back up in a groovy electric guitar part. The song had slow parts and fast parts. Elvis floated through all of them. When Suspicious Minds came out in August 1969, it went straight up the charts. Elvis had his first #1 hit in his 7 years, but the comeback still wasn't complete. Elvis wanted to play concerts again. For this, he needed Colonel Parker's help. Parker made a deal for Elvis to appear for several weeks at a giant hotel in Las Vegas. Now, Elvis could sing in front of fans, but he wouldn't have to travel all over the country to perform. Once again, right before his first show, Elvis got nervous. He paced around backstage. He worried that people would be disappointed. Boy, was he wrong. In just a few weeks, Elvis sold more than 100,000 tickets. In 1 year, Elvis had made a dramatic comeback. He was a star on television, radio, and stage again. Chapter 10, Downhill. We all knew it was coming. It was a great comeback. The string of sold-out concerts and hits, records jump-started Elvis Presley's career. He was incredibly popular again. In 1973, another Elvis TV special made history, Aloha from Hawaii. It was shown in 40 countries to more than 1 billion people. But his personal problems didn't go away. For a little while, Elvis had done things his way. He'd fought hard to make the 1968 comeback special, or as I call it, the 68 comeback special, and to sing songs that Colonel Parker didn't think were right for him. Now Elvis was working harder than ever. He began to wear out, and when he got more tired, he found it harder to resist Colonel Tom Parker. Deep down, he also believed they were a team. Elvis never forgot how Colonel Parker had kept his career alive while he was in Germany. Colonel Parker took control again. Elvis performed more than 1,100 concerts from 1969 to 1977. Elvis's marriage had been strained for many years. Now it just fell apart. 1973, Elvis and Priscilla got divorced. More and more, Elvis depended on the Memphis Mafia. This was the nickname for the guys Elvis called friends. I love that picture. It's a great picture. The members of the Memphis Mafia spent all their time at Graceland. Why not? Elvis had so much money that he could buy them cars or motorcycles. In return, they kept Elvis company. The plain truth is, Elvis was a drug addict. His body needed the pills to get through each day. Elvis should have gotten help for himself. Instead, he got angry whenever someone suggested he had a problem. His friends also didn't push hard enough. They were scared of saying something that he didn't want to hear. Elvis had a bad temper. The guys also liked things the way they were. They didn't want the fun to end. Elvis started acting strange. One time, December 1970, he decided he had to see President Richard Nixon. So Elvis hopped on a plane and headed straight for Washington, D.C. At the White House, he demanded a meeting. Sure enough, he got one. President Nixon met with Elvis that very night. As the 1970s grew on, Elvis grew sicker. He had never taken care of himself. He ate too much junk food. He loved milkshakes and fried peanut butter and nano sandwiches. He rarely exercised. All his bad habits started catching up with him. Again, he gained a lot of weight. His face got puffy. He couldn't fit into clothes. This embarrassed Elvis. He began to struggle on stage. Sometimes he forgot the words to his most famous songs. Other times, Elvis had to miss a concert. One time, he stomped off the stage in the middle of a show. In 1973, Elvis collapsed and had to go to the hospital. Life went on like this for a few years. No one stepped in to stop it. The Elvis everybody knew was gone. What fans saw now was a broken man. Overweight, lonely, unable to remember words to his own songs. Elvis's nights were like other people's days. One night, Elvis returned to Graceland after a 10:30 p.m. visit to the dentist. Elvis called some friends to come over. Around 4 in the morning, Elvis and a friend tried playing racquetball, but the game didn't last long. Elvis was too out of shape. It was almost morning. When Elvis couldn't fall asleep, someone gave him some sleeping pills. They didn't work, so he took more. He was found dead in his bathroom the next day. That date was August 16th, 1977. What am I going to do? Cried Vernon, learning his son was dead. Everything is gone. It was such a sad, terrible end to Elvis Presley's life. Lisa Marie was just 9. She would grow up without her father. And then there were the fans. Elvis left behind millions of them. Year after year, there were new fans. Many were born after he died. They only know the king from records and TV reruns. As recently as 2002, a new release of Elvis's hits sold more than any other collection in the country. By some counts, Elvis had sold close to 1 billion albums. Elvis is buried in the grounds of Graceland. The graves of his parents lie nearby his. So does the grave of little Jesse Garon, the twin he never knew. Every year on the anniversary of his death, fans crowd into Memphis to remember their idol. In 2006, the Japanese Prime Minister was visiting the United States. He had one request. He asked President George W. Bush if he could visit Graceland. Lisa Marie and Priscilla Presley gave a private tour. Being there was like a dream, the Japanese Prime Minister said. He began to sing one of Elvis's songs. It's got a timeline of Elvis's life, but it'd take an awful lot to go through here. Let me see. I did skip over a thing here I thought was interesting. Las Vegas is a strange place for a city, the center of the Mojave Desert. The city only exists because of water from the Hoover Dam, and gambling there is legal. In most other cities, it is against the law. Gambling led to the building of giant casinos and hotels. These days, Las Vegas attracts almost 40 million visitors from each year, and there's a whole bunch of Elvises running around. The biggest hotels and casinos in Las Vegas are on the Strip, with its flashing neon signs. The desert heat keeps people indoors where they can gamble, shop, eat, and see big shows. In the 1970s, the biggest show of all was Elvis's. He started his concert comeback there in 1969. Over the years, Elvis kept going back to Las Vegas. Some of his concerts were broadcast on TV. Even now, they are sometimes rerun. They also inspired one of his biggest songs, Viva Las Vegas! Viva Las Vegas! A little thing about Graceland here as well. Even though his mother had died, Elvis kept the house, which sat on 14 acres of land in Memphis. There were white columns outside, a marble fireplace in the front hall, and 8 bathrooms. The house looked just the way Elvis wanted. The jungle room had jungle flowers and plants, bamboo walls, and wild animal prints in the furniture. Graceland also had a racquetball court, a room for Elvis's gold records and awards, a garage full of antique cars. He even kept 2 planes on the property, one of them named after his daughter, Lisa Marie. In 1976, Bruce Springsteen wanted to meet Elvis so much he climbed the walls at Graceland. Guards caught him and sent him away because Elvis wasn't home. Today, nobody in the Presley family lives there, but the house is open for tours. I was there when I was too young to appreciate it, and I need to go back there, so I'm planning a trip. Let me see. There was a really cool little mini thing here about jumpsuits. I thought you might like to hear about that. By the way, I'd never read this book before. I just bought it, or I'm sorry, it was given to me, I should say, and I hadn't read it yet, so this was actually the first reading. So, we're learning together. There it is. All right. Elvis jumpsuits, much like this one right here. Maybe it's because as a boy he could barely afford shoes, but Elvis, the rock star, loved fancy clothes. Beginning in 1957, a Hollywood designer named Nudie Cohen made many wild outfits for Elvis. The most famous was a gold lame jumpsuit. It cost $10,000, more expensive than a car at the time. For Elvis's TV comeback in 1968, a designer named Bill Belew made a black leather suit, for the king. In the 70s, Belew designed jumpsuits for Elvis. They had thick belts and pants flared out way at the bottom. Many were studded with jewels. Belew gave the suits names. Burning Flame of Love was a fire red. Aloha had a giant eagle on the back and a cape. Belew still makes jumpsuits that sell for as much as $5,000. Belew's company also makes shiny silver and diamond rings decorated with the letters TCB. That stands for Taking Care of Business. It was Elvis' slogan. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. This was Who Was Elvis Presley by the very opinionated Geoff Edgers. And I couldn't help it. I had to read this to you. I think we just learned a little bit about Elvis together. So, hopefully I'll see you out there. Hopefully you're all staying safe. And I just want to say, are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart? Does your memory stray to a bright summer's day when I kissed you and called you sweetheart? You know what? That's too sad to end on. I'll end this video on a high note. Oh, well, bless my soul, what's wrong with me? I'm missing like a man on a fuzzy tree. My friends say I'm acting wild as a bug. I'm in love. I'm all shook up. Thank you. Thank you very much.